the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, episode 83.
Welcome to the Global Energy Leaders Podcast, powered by R Squared Global.
Welcome to another edition of the Global Energy Leaders Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Ray. So good to have you. Today, we get into it with Mike Bailis talking about solar. And Mike's got a lot of interesting perspectives on things. We talk about solar communities and the free market and tax credits and how that's going to work out with solar. A lot of good discussion. Mike is the co-founder and chief sales officer at SUNation Solar Systems, and we will link to his company's website in the show notes. As he says towards the end, be sure to follow, like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. And if you are going to be at SPI, Mike will be there, which is just coming up here in a few days. We will link to that in the show notes. If you can't get there, well, I think you're going to be missing out. It seems like it's shaping up to be a great conference this year. So, question of the day. What are your thoughts on federal tax credits as they pertain to the solar industry? Should they be extended? Should we stop them? Should they be increased? Let me know. Ryan at globalenergymedia.com. That's Ryan at globalenergymedia.com. And without further ado, here's my conversation with Mike Bailis. Well, Mike, it's great to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I am doing great.
Good deal. Well, let's get right into it. One of the things when you think about solar is you think about tax credits. It's one of the topics that always seems to be connected with solar. Kind of give us where we're at with federal tax credits here in the U.S., and is there a fear that maybe we won't get some of the solar work done that people are trying to get done before these tax credits expire?
Well, it's a good question, especially since the administration has shifted a little bit. I think the good news is that one of the things that the administration has focused on is jobs. And so I think that the tax credits in and of themselves are relatively safe because they have sustained and grown an industry that's a couple of 100,000 people. And as such, I don't believe that the administration is going to have make any real sense of reducing or eliminating the tax credit program the way it is. On a federal level, we have a couple of more years at the 30% tax credit. It then drops down to 26% and then again down to 22%. But this is over the next 4 or 5 years. And what's nice, one of the changes they did make in the tax credit extension program was instead of having a date by which the program or the specific project needed to be completed by, they changed the wording to start by. Meaning, if a contract is in, or if you're in contract at that moment of time, and you put a nail in the wall, so to speak, that project would be dedicated as started and qualify for the tax credit at that moment. So even when the tax credit is going to change, let's say from 30% to 26%, that'll create a level of urgency, that loss of 4%. So there'll be a lot of projects in that last 3 or 4 months of that year where it's going to drop down to 20%. So it'll happen again at 22%, and then, of course, really happen when it expires in about 4 or 5 years from now. So the question then becomes is that sustainable? Is that enough? My belief is, and I think the entire industry is hopeful, that we reach a point of grid parity, that we do not need federal tax credits as incentives to deploy solar. That there are places right now and there are systems that are being installed right now, large-scale utility-level projects that result in grid parity, meaning they can produce electricity at essentially the same value, same cost of production for certain types of other plants, whether it's gas, oil, nuclear, etc. So as a result, we are approaching that. Now, these large-scale projects are monstrous projects, 25 megawatts, acres and acres and acres of solar. We need to bring this down to the point where a relatively small system reaches grid parity, and that means getting residential size systems down substantially below $2 a watt, getting commercial systems down to about a buck 10 or buck 20 a watt. When we start getting close to those numbers, and I think that we can get there in the next few years, then we won't need federal tax incentives to deploy solar, that we can stand on the merit of what solar is, which is a clean, renewable energy source that is designed to work for 20 or 30 years with very little involvement in maintenance and repairs and things of that nature.
Okay, so what would you say to someone who says that the government shouldn't be in the business of subsidizing solar, period, and that they should just let them run out or even pull them back now? What would be your response to an objection like that?
Hey, you know what? That'd be great. I would rather operate in a world of free enterprise and free market. When they eliminate all of the subsidies that they give to the oil and coal and nuclear industry, and they take all those subsidies away, then we're all on equal playing field, and go for it. But until which time as they do that, until they actually eliminate all of those subsidies that all the industry gets for I mean, there's some programs involved now with the oil industry that date back to the early 1900s when oil was still a difficult product to find. Now they have the technology to find, oil reserves and gas reserves much easier, and there's less speculation. They don't just drill holes in the ground and hope for the best. They know geologically how to find oil and gas reserves. Yes, there's some risk involved, without question, but nowhere near the value of the subsidies that they get for speculative drilling. So all of the industries, all the electrical production industries, all the energy industries have received and still receive many of these subsidies of some sort. So my argument, therefore, is if they get it, the solar industry should get it just as well. And when they eliminate them all, then I'm okay with that.
Equal treatment across the board, huh?
That's it.
Well, that's a fair position to have. And it seems like we talk to people in the energy business. You talk to folks who like me and yourself who are free market enterprise folks, and it's like, well, we're kind of in a bad spot right now because if you roll it back here, then you got to change this over there, and we just know that the way the federal government works, you're not going to get that kind of legislation passed overnight. So it is an interesting problem. Now, one of the things I'm curious to hear your opinion on is you talk about grid parity, and one of the things I've talked about on the show before is, in my opinion, is solar and renewables. If there was a way to take them and say, okay, well, you could not only reduce your power bill, but you could actually potentially, sell your power to your neighbors, and all of a sudden you could make this into a money-making revenue scheme. It seems like I talked to some folks a while back on the podcast. There was a little bit of contention there with being able to put back into the grid and how much you could, and the local utility there wouldn't really allow them. It would seem that if the government would get out of the way, and here in the U.S., if we could begin to say, like in my neighborhood, it's a gated community, we're kind of off the beaten path. If the houses in here could take their roofs and then begin to sell power back to the grid, not only is it a metric where you say, well, you can save money, you can actually make money. Is that something that you think is going to be more and more possible in the U.S., or do you think that we're still too much regulation to prevent us from doing that?
Well, there are small power producers in almost every market, in addition to large power producers. I don't know if an individual homeowner or small, really, really small scale, it's going to be practical. But, what's the difference if somebody happens to have let's say they have a piece of property upstate New York and happen to have a relatively vibrant stream, a water stream that flows through their property, that they could somehow erect some type of small turbine, water turbine, that generated electricity and produced more power than perhaps what they would need. Could they sell it? Sure, why not? Why could they not be? What's the difference then if somebody was to make an investment in a solar energy system on their own property to do that? All right, the fact of the matter is it's been proven that the methodology by which we produce and distribute electricity in this country are large power plants with large distribution systems. And what we have seen when there's major power failures is seems to be some type of mechanism that ultimately, for safety reasons, starts to shut things off. And we go into these major power failures. A number of years ago, I believe it was around 2004, we had a major power failure in this area. And I don't remember the exact reason for it, but it was tied it was tied to something that happened at one of the main power plants here in the east here, and it triggered an event that resulted in about a 12-hour power failure throughout the entire region. And it was pretty. They said that it probably cost a couple of $1 billion in both lost production, et cetera, et cetera. A study years later determined that if there was just 500 megawatts of distributed generation spread out through the region, that would have mitigated most of that power failure and would have saved billions of dollars. Now, what's the difference, therefore, if whether that 500 megawatt of power they're talking about, this distribution, how do you put a value to putting solar throughout an entire region and save all of this money? This is the upside advantage to the community and to the electrical generating industry, and that they have been holding. They've been holding this back, all right, because they control the power. They don't want 5,000 or 10,000 or 20,000 power plants running in there. They want a couple of dozen that they can control and control the resource. We're getting to the point where distributed generation clearly is a direction that we need to go in. It's singular plants are prone to terrorism. If you have 100 plants in a small region, what are you going to do? Knock out 100? No, highly unlikely. So there's a lot of reasons why you want to start distributing generation throughout an entire region and not have one or two or three large power plants. So solar is part of that reevaluation, so we say, of the grid and making it stronger and more durable and more robust, and it doesn't fail every time there's a major, when there's a major problem on one plant, boom, everything shuts down. So, I'm a very strong believer in local distributed generation, and solar is just one of those ways to do it.
Right. I guess one of the questions I've had, and we've had some discussion on the show about this as well, is when I hear people, and I'm curious to get your opinion, when I hear people who are maybe in the media or popular opinions at least talk about solar, they talk about how great it is and how awesome it is, and I don't think anybody disagrees that the viability of solar is potential. It seems that though the folks I've talked to who have worked on large scale solar projects, is their opinion that they've told me is the batteries just aren't there to do major solar projects yet, and that even though that these projects are good and the idea is good, is the batteries are lagging. What is your take on the batteries? Are the batteries there to begin to be able to trust solar on more large-scale type projects?
No, not yet, but it's coming. I believe that we're in where we were 10 or 15 years ago in the solar industry, really the beginning stages. I mean, I've been doing this 15 years in solar electric, and we've seen tremendous changes over the last 15 years. In technology, in quality and reliability and everything. I think we're about the same stage maybe where we were 10 years ago on the battery side. I think there's a lot of development that needs to be made. I clearly believe that you're right. When you can finally get to the point where battery storage is reliable, cost effective to build them, it's a game changer for the large-scale solar industry, because if you can produce power, whether it's through solar, through wind, whatever, and store that energy when you need it at night or whenever there's large influxes of demand, you're going to be in much better shape, and that's just going to increase deployment of solar. And so batteries are ultimately going some type of battery system. Now, we look at traditional battery systems, but let's get creative here, okay? One of the things that I saw as an opportunity, all right, out in let's say out in the West, where they have a lot of hydropower, all right, water flows down and gets caught up in a dam, and then they have hydropower that's produced by creating these large reservoirs. Well, once the water goes through the flue, it's down the river again. If you had a solar system that was designed to pump that water back up into the reservoir, that's essentially a battery system, isn't it? Because that power is going to get produced again once it transfers through the turbine. So we can get creative here. We have to find alternative mechanisms by which to store energy. Maybe there'll be a point at some point where solar energy can be used to convert water into its basic parts of hydrogen and oxygen. And you could then start developing hydrogen as what? As the mechanism of stored energy with oxygen stored together to do what? Burn them and make more power. That's stored electrical energy. But again, let's get creative here. Let's come up with mechanisms. This is, I'm far from an engineer or a scientist, but I have basic logic understanding that solar is the ultimate energy source. And it's just a question of when we get to other energy, it's really just years and years away from what solar started somewhere, eons ago. I always look at all the dinosaurs and say, although they were the beginnings of the oil industry, but they occurred, millions and millions of years ago. So, it started with what? It started with the solar energy at the time producing plants that dinosaurs ate that ultimately died off and became carbon and ultimately became oil. Well, it all started with the sun. So we need to just eliminate a couple of million years and start using the sun and then just trying to find from point A to point B, which is, yes, get it stored. Batteries, clearly, once the technology has been improved and the reliability has been improved, then batteries are a game changer for the solar industry without question.
Well, you said you covered a lot of ground there, but I think the thing that I like, and we kind of talked about government subsidies earlier, and we both said, well, hey, we're free market guys, and we want the free market to kind of determine stuff. And I think that one of the things, and this was my point with selling the power back into the grid. I was talking to some folks the other day, and I mentioned this. I said, if I could put it on my house and sell it back into the grid, all of a sudden, man, that's a game changer. And I think too long in the energy space, we've looked at it as either if you're green energy, you're anti-capitalist, and if you're big oil, then you're this, you're that. There's so many stereotypes, and all those ideas you threw out there. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist. I don't know if they'll work or not. But you tell you what, I like those kind of ideas because we do need to figure out new creative ways to make stuff profitable, to make it cheap, to make it cleaner. And I think one of the things that you're touching on here, and I think that solar probably, at least if you get outside the solar community, people don't realize is, I think where solar really is going to make a lot of ground and may never actually get its proper due, is that it's so vital in emerging markets and what's going on there in emerging markets that we're having to, you talk to people and there's new and creative ways in which solar is going to these emerging markets, and they're giving people access to power, and it's going to shape the way countries come into the first world because of what's going on with the solar technology there. So I think solar actually, on some level, because it has a lot of younger folks that are entrepreneurial minded, that they're going to figure out a lot of really cutting edge stuff that we haven't even considered. And some of the ideas you have right there are quite fascinating.
The emerging solar business, in third world countries is enormous. I heard recently about a program that they called it community solar, but in reality, it's not really community solar, but it was a program by which, and this I believe was in India, and it was in the not in the main metropolitan areas, but out in the middle of nowhere, kind of in the villages where they had almost no electrical production whatsoever, and they were getting little solar plants, just a module or two that were installed in such a way that produced electricity in a small battery system so that they could have lighting at night. And the whole idea was that it allowed the young kids, to be able to read and study at night because they had the lights to read with. And so they could study and then become more educated. I mean, at the core sense, solar has created an opportunity to educate the world by allowing them to continue to read at night. So, I mean, the simple thing like that, it's just absolutely phenomenal. And they sold millions of these systems for a few dollars or something like that. So this is a great thing. Community solar is really where I think the future is on Long Island and in the other regions up here, because so many homes are not good applications. They're not good for solar. So that's kind of the next wave for us.
And so when you say community solar, why don't you kind of break that down for the audience members who might not be exactly familiar with what the term means?
Sure. Well, community solar in the truest sense means a group of people, all right, a community, is getting together to purchase and construct a solar array that's going to feed into the grid at one central location, but all of that power gets credited to all of the people within the community in equal shares or however. Now, ideally, that's wonderful, but it's very, very problematic to get this large group of people together and coordinate this and do all that. So it's in our world, the community solar scenario is where we have a single entity that's going to be an owner operator of a large system. It could be on the rooftop of a commercial building, a couple of 100,000 watts of power. And that couple of 100,000 watts of power is going to be producing power just like a small power plant and feeding that into the grid. But this is where the difference is. There will be individual subscribers, people that say, I would like to purchase that electricity. And that subscriber would be able to get allocated a percentage. To make it simple, let's suppose you have a system that produced 100,000 kilowatt hours, all right? And you had 100 people and each wanted 1,000 kilowatt hours. They would all equally take a subscription for 1,000. Now, they may normally pay 21 cents a kilowatt hour for that electricity, but now, because it's a solar electric generating plant, the owner-operator, since the fuel's free, can charge a lot less for that electricity, say 16 cents. So the subscriber gets credit for that 1,000 kilowatt hours and saves 5 cents a kilowatt hour. Doesn't have to be connected to their house. They don't have to have a solar system on that. They could live in the middle of the woods. They could have a situation where they're a rental and they don't own the property. Whatever, if they pay electricity, they can be a subscriber. And so in our world, in this area here, as an example, we have about 1.1 million ratepayers, of which about 40 to 45,000 of them or so have already gone solar. And it's predicted that there's probably a good application for solar in 100 to 150,000 properties. That leaves 800,000, 900,000 potential opportunities where solar isn't practical. And yet, with community solar, they could take all the advantages of what solar offers, which is lower cost of power. All right? In this area, we may, because of community solar and some of the other renewable programs that are in place, we may not have to build a new power plant in this area to supply electricity to Long Islanders for about another 10 or 15 years. And power plants cost a lot of money. So as a result of that, solar and wind and these other renewable energy sources are now providing enough power to offset any growth that we have, etc. So community solar is the next big real avenue for deployment, because you can deploy large-scale 100 to 300,000 watt systems at a much lower cost per watt installed as you could on an individual homeowner's home by a substantial margin, by as much as 50% less. So as a result of that, you can get more watts on a roof, and typically they're in great areas, no shade, big, large, flat roof. So this community solar program is still just really in its infancy, and we have projects right now that we're working on and hope to have some of the first community solar projects ready to go. We have some people that are already interested in subscribing, because why wouldn't you not want to save 5 cents a kilowatt hour? And you don't even have to put a system on your house to do it. It's a gold mine. It's a gold mine.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought that up, because I do have a question that I've been wanting to ask someone, and you seem like you might have the answer for me here. One of the questions I've had about wind and solar both in general is, if a pipeline blows up, you could run the numbers on how fast it takes to get the pipeline back on. If you look at solar farms and stuff like this, if a tornado comes through, or earthquake, or some kind of disaster, or hailstorm, whatever, tears up what you're proposing that we do here, what kind of downtime are we looking for something like that? Is it something that they can get fixed in weeks, or are we talking about months, or what would the turnaround time be for something like that?
We haven't had one of those where we've had any situation, so I'm just going to speculate here, and it really is going to be dependent on the severity of the damage. I
Sure.
mean, if you have 1,000 modules, in a particular area, and big wind comes along and knocks out, 15% of them, that doesn't mean that the entire system is down.
Gotcha.
Only 15% is down.
Right.
Right now, it may be a little more than that because it may be dependent on how they're all connected. But in reality, it would be pretty devastating to wipe out an entire array. It's possible. You might lose a percentage. All right. If you do a wind farm let's say offshore of Long Island, and you have 15 or 20 power generating wind mills out there, and one of them fails for whatever reason, you still got another 15 or 16 or 17 that are working. Even regular power plants have multiple generators, and not all of them are operating at the same time. And a lot of times they'll turn one off to do maintenance on it while the others operate. So I don't see that there's any significant difference there. Solar arrays are made up individual modules. There's thousands of them in a large array. Any one module could potentially fail, but that's not going to shut the entire system down. So I don't really believe that. I mean, look, again, outside of a major catastrophe where an entire array, is it possible that you have a large scale array in a area that is prone to earthquakes, and an earthquake comes along and devastates an entire array? Yes, of course it is. That's catastrophic.
Sure. Right.
But
it's an outlier.
You don't design. I don't think you design a solar system on top of a fault either. I think they'd be pretty smart to put them in areas where there's less likelihood of problems like that. So, siting, of course, is critical.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend putting one on a fault either, but I just it's one of those things, when coming from my background, which is mainly in oil and gas, you see when something happens, you're just used to, okay, this is what would happen. You do this, and I just haven't heard much discussion on if something as you say, catastrophic, nothing that we wish happens, but something that were to happen, what would be the downtime? But I got to ask you this before I let you go. This episode, we're recording it for the audience's point of perspective on August the 14th. It comes out on September the 7th. Are you going to be at the conference in Las Vegas on the 10th through the 13th, the SPI conference?
Yeah, yes, I will be there. We go every year, and of course, I love going to Vegas because I like to play a little poker while I'm on my downtime. But
right.
We love the show in Vegas, and we've gone to every single SPI pretty much since my partner and I have been in business, because each year we look for the next best product out there. We're always looking for the latest technology, and the only problem is there's a lot of people out there that have really good ideas, and the biggest challenge is really a being able to having appropriate capital to get your business ramped up. And we had a product last year. We absolutely loved it. It was a company that manufactured a solar module that had an integrated racking system. It was called Beam Reach. And we loved the product. It deployed really well. And we really, really thought highly of it. And we even bought some to put on our own building just to check it out. Unfortunately, the company was not well funded, well capitalized, and they went out of business. It's unfortunate because it was a really cool idea. Every year we go to these conventions hoping to find somebody that got creative and came up with something that really makes a lot of sense. We've increased our efficiency and reduced the time it takes us to install solar by a substantial margin. Back in the day, we used to install systems that would take us 3 days to install, that we can now install in 1 day. So we're always looking for the next best product, the next best efficient way to do something, the racking systems, faster this, better that, all the time.
Awesome. Well, look, Mike, why don't you let the audience know where they can find you at, and we will link to that in the show notes. So, Facebook, Twitter, website, wherever you got, and we'll put all that in the show notes so people can find you.
Well, we can find us at SUNation.li.com. That's SUNATIONLI.com.
Okay, great. And if you will be at the SPI conference, Mike will be there. Will you have a booth, or are you just walking around?
We'll be walking around.
Okay.
We're also on Facebook and Twitter at SUNation Solar, so they can check us in on that as well. And we're constantly getting the message out through every social media method we can. And so look us up and like us and follow us and share all of our posts. And and join the nation.
All right. Well, we will link to that so people can find you guys, like, comment, share, retweet, repost, the whole 9 yards. Mike, thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey, thank you. It's great talking with you.
The Global Energy Leaders podcast is produced by Michael Sims and Chris Prine. Chris Prine also serves as editor for the Global Energy Leaders podcast. Until next time, keep climbing.
Thanks for listening to the Global Energy Leaders podcast, powered by R Squared Global.